President Xi Jinping says he wants to build a world-class military. The dictator made the comments this week during his opening remarks to the National Congress of the Chinese Communist Party. He also made it clear that U.S.-China relations are not going to improve anytime soon, and he has his sights set firmly on Taiwan. Xi will most likely be confirmed on Saturday for his third term as leader, putting him in the same stratosphere as Mao Zedong. Joining us now for more on this to discuss this is the author of The Great U.S.-China Tech War, Gordon Chang. Gordon, great to have you with us.
Thank you so much, John.
All right, so we're not expecting any surprises on Saturday, are we?
Well, you know, the Communist Party is less transparent than it's been in a very long time. So it is becoming far more opaque. And most people expect Xi Jinping to get his third term. I don't have any information that says he won't. But the way I look at this, John, is we'll know when we know. And there are some signs that it does look like this is going to be the worst of all possible outcomes, with Xi Jinping getting unfettered power.
And so, you know, we see this increasing tension between the U.S. and the Chinese. Do you see a war brewing anytime in the near future?
Yes, and probably sooner rather than later. You know, the Chinese regime is building up its military, fastest militarization since the end of the Second World War. But more ominously, it is preparing the Chinese citizens for war. So this is mobilization of the civilian sector. You know, we don't know what's in Xi Jinping's mind, but what we can say is that throughout history, when militant regimes have done things like we have seen in China over the last several years, they have always gone to war. So history says that at least we've got to be prepared, and we're really not. You know, it was really good that the Chief of Naval Operations, the Navy's top officer, Admiral Mike Gilday, on Wednesday said that we could be at war this year, because that's much better than the Pentagon timeframe, which was we might go to war in a half decade from now or a decade from now. There was a lack of sense of urgency at the upper reaches of the Pentagon and certainly in the Biden administration. Fortunately, the Navy's top sailor said, no, this is a tonight thing.
You know, one of the things, too, that's often not discussed in this conversation is all the money that is being allocated towards Ukraine. That money isn't necessarily going to Ukraine, but it is going back to the U.S. military to help it rebuild some of the ammunition and stuff that they've sent to Ukraine. How important is that funding for the overall strength of the U.S. military in face of this Chinese threat?
Yeah, right now the funding for the military should be increased, but the more important thing is that the military should be using its money to get ready for war instead of some of the things that it has been doing.
Okay.
Now, one can make the argument that the best way to deter China is to make sure Russia does not succeed in Ukraine. So I don't worry, in a sense, about the general strategy. But I do worry that a lot of our munitions are going to Ukraine, and that makes us less prepared. And by the way, you just can't turn on a switch and say, we're going to build more of this or that. It actually takes some time because we're very slow in the way that we make weapons and the way that we replenish our stocks.
No, it's a great point on how the money is being spent because, you know, at this time right now, the Pentagon is talking about renaming a bunch of military bases to the tune of millions of dollars. And I know it doesn't sound like a lot of money in the grand scheme of things, but they're spending tens of thousands of dollars, I believe, in Ecuador on gender studies stuff. Somehow the Pentagon is involved in that as well. So, you know, the money's being spread around, but maybe not in the right way. Also, in terms of the timeline, there's a veteran CIA analyst named John Culver, and he says it would not be a strategic surprise if China did invade Taiwan because they would have to do a nationwide buildup that would likely be noticeable within months to a year in advance. Now, you talked about how the Chinese government is preparing the civilian population. Are these the first steps of what Culver is talking about?
Yes, he actually does mention civilian mobilization. You know, Culver is basically, his assumption is that Chinese military planners think like American military planners. And that's not true because the Chinese actually fight wars in very different ways. If we were going to invade Taiwan, yes, the world would have months, maybe years of notice of what we were planning to do. And so Culver thinks that we would have months and maybe years of notice of China's move on Taiwan. But the Chinese fight wars differently. So, for instance, they could actually start a war against Taiwan by For instance, releasing a pathogen on the island, killing or maiming or certainly paralyzing society. We wouldn't know when war began. So, Culver is making these assumptions, which I think are extremely dangerous and show just how the Pentagon is not prepared to think about China in a realistic way.
Lastly, Gordon, real quick, too, Xi kicked off his week-long Congress by touting his COVID zero strategy. We talked a little bit about this, but tell us the impact of COVID zero on kind of the mindset of the Chinese population, knowing that they can be controlled. I mean, we hear that people's phones, they have to get these QR codes to basically leave their homes, and the Chinese government can turn them red with the flip of a switch, whether they test positive or not.
Yes, and they did that to prevent a bank run in the central part of China about a couple of months ago. Zero COVID is really paralyzing Chinese society. It is really undermining the economy, but it's making the Chinese people really upset and angry right now. And by the way, that makes Xi Jinping more insecure, and that gives Xi Jinping more incentive to move against enemies, to distract the Chinese people from the disasters internally that he is responsible for, including the zero COVID policies.
Gordon Chang, great to see you. Take care.
Thank you so much, John, and stay safe.
You too.